So I've taken a couple of excerpts here from the text. And so this is how the apology begins. I did not know men of Athens. Right, so here we immediately have a reference to Athens. And you can see in saying men of Athens that he's addressing the jury. Right? This is the people to whom he's speaking. How my accusers affected you. So they've obviously already heard the accusations brought by the prosecution. As for me, I was almost carried away in spite of myself, so persuasively did they speak. Now you really should ask yourself, what's interesting about this statement? Because it's an odd statement to make, right? Obviously, when we do something individually, we know our actions better than other people, at least usually, right? But Socrates here is saying they spoke so persuasively that they almost made me believe the accusations they brought against me, right? And you want to pay attention to this issue of persuasion, right? Because it's going to figure prominently in Socrates' argument, persuasion and the nature of it. You know, how people get other people to believe or to think the way they think. And yet, he says, hardly anything of what they said is true. Of the many lies they told, one in particular surprised me, namely that you should be careful not to be deceived by an accomplished speaker like me. That they were not ashamed to be immediately proved wrong by the facts, when I show myself not to be an accomplished speaker at all, that I thought was most shameless on their part. Unless indeed they call an accomplished speaker the man who speaks the truth. Now, let me switch over here for a second. I'm going to highlight this. And then I want to go down to this little... Actually, you know what? Maybe I'll just go to the next page for a moment. So you want to pay attention to this emphasis, these words like speaker, orator, persuasion. Recall that Athens was a democracy. But when we say it was a democracy, as I've already mentioned earlier, in a very involved sense, right? The jury is 500 people or 501 people, right? So 501 citizens are in the jury, right? There's much more direct democracy going on. You don't have the same sense of representative democracy that we do. You have this sense of all the citizens are somehow responsible for the governance of the city-state of Athens. You know, and of course, you know, obviously the critiques will be made of this. Critiques will be made of this. You know, the slaves weren't allowed to vote, women weren't allowed to vote, and all those things are true. But I'm actually not making a statement, positive or negative, against Athenian democracy here. What I do want to emphasize is that direct democracy, and dot my I there, like Athens democracy, requires, I should have capitalized that D, nearly constant persuasion. You know, one citizen will think that such and such a thing is true, or such a given thing ought to be done, and another citizen will disagree. and even let's pretend they can never convince each other, right? But they want to convince everybody else to agree with them, to vote their way. So that the politics of Athens, the policy of Athens, the law of Athens, is influenced by their thoughts. And so they're going to have recourse to fine speaking, to tricks of, you might even say tricks of persuasion, right? To get them to think the way they think. And so the figure of the orator in ancient Athens is essential to understand how Athens worked, and it's essential to understand what Socrates is contending with. And with that, let's go back to the text for a second. So, he says that let me go back a little bit from where we ended, that they were not ashamed to be immediately proved wrong by the facts when I show myself not to be an accomplished speaker at all, because they said he was an accomplished speaker. That I thought was most shameless on their part, unless they indeed they call an accomplished speaker the man who speaks the truth. And here we get a little piece of how Socrates thinks, because you pay attention to where he says, unless indeed they call an accomplished speaker the man who speaks the truth. He's very concerned about definition, about the proper role of a given thing is, a speaker, a philosopher, right? What they're supposed to be doing, what the purpose of it is, right? And so he says, unless they call an accomplished speaker the man who speaks the truth, namely him, he's not an accomplished speaker. But he says, if they mean that, I would agree that I'm an orator, but not after their manner. Pay very close attention to that. But not after their manner. For indeed, as I say, practically nothing they said was true. Right? So Socrates here, when he says, for indeed, as I say, practically nothing they said was true, he is showing that he does think that the accomplished speaker is one who should be speaking the truth. Right? So for Socrates, a good speaker speaks the truth and is concerned about the truth. But he argues that for his accusers, a good speaker kind of tricks people to believe various things. But then he goes on, right? So, I'm sorry, let me back myself up here a second. So, for Socrates, a good speaker speaks the truth. For his accusers, he says, a good speaker tricks people to believe things. And they're saying he's like that. And he's saying they're like that. So, of course, we have to try to sort through this to determine which is which. From me, he says, you will hear the whole truth. Though not by Zeus, gentlemen, expressed in embroidered and stylized phrases like this. Now this, by the way, when you're reading, you should really stop and ask yourself as you write your notes, and I'm not even going to answer it right now. Maybe this is something you can say in your discussion. You should stop and ask yourself, what does that mean? What does it mean when you hear something expressed in embroidered and stylized phrases like theirs? What is he trying to say when he says that? Try to answer that question. So if you're straining about what to say in the discussion, that's an example. As you're reading, that phrase should just pop out and kind of hit you between the eyes and say, "What? What does that mean?" And that offering that question is a piece of discussion, and then trying to answer the question can be a piece of discussion. but things spoken at random and expressed in the first words that come to mind. For I put my trust in the justice of what I say. The justice of what I say. And let none of you expect anything else. It would not be fitting at my age, because understand Socrates is a very old man at this point, as it might be for a young man, to toy with words when I appear before you. Pay very close attention to the words here, to toy with words. Why would he say, who would he say is toying with words? And ask yourself, how is Socrates going to be different than they are, or if he really succeeds? You might come to the end of the apologies. You come to the end of the apology and think he doesn't really succeed. But you have to ask yourself these questions. All right, so that's just a little prompt to kind of model perhaps how you could interact with this first section. You might not have highlighted as much. I highlighted a bit more than I even would in real life because of the fact that I have no way of... I'm on an iPad and I have no way of showing you what I'm pointing at without highlighting. That can give you some pieces to start discussion with. So I hope that helps. Take care.